Before I tell you this story, I need you to understand one thing. Everything I am about to tell you is true, not inspired by true events, not based on a real story, not adapted from something that happened. True, every single word. There was a man, an ordinary man, a man who designed ships for a living, a man who loved his wife, a man who wanted to go home. On the 6th of August, 1945, the world dropped an atomic bomb on him. He survived. 3 days later, the world dropped another one. He survived that too. His name was Tsutomu Yamaguchi, and this is his story. To understand why this story matters, you have to first understand who Tsutomu Yamaguchi was before any of it happened. Because he was not a soldier. He was not a hero in any conventional sense. He was not a man who sought danger or courted adventure. He was an engineer. Born in Nagasaki, Japan on the 16th of March, 1916, Tsutomu grew up in a country that was slowly, quietly preparing for war, even as most ordinary people simply went on living their ordinary lives. He studied technical design. He was good with his hands. He understood machines, the logic of them, the beauty of how one piece connects to another, how something enormous can be built from something small if you understand the principles well enough. He joined Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, one of Japan's great engineering companies, and he began designing ships. Oil tankers mostly, massive steel vessels that would carry fuel across the seas. He married a woman named Hisako. They had a baby boy named Katsutoshi. Life was simple. Life was good. Then the war came. Not to Tsutomu personally, not at first. The war was something that happened to other people in other places. He opposed Japan's role in the conflict. He said so openly, which was brave in a country where disagreement was not well tolerated. He worried. He worried so deeply about what would happen if Japan lost the war that he considered something unthinkable, ending his family's lives himself with sleeping pills, rather than let them suffer whatever would come after defeat. He did not do it. Something kept him from that edge. Call it hope, call it love, call it the same stubborn insistence on life that would save him, not once, but twice in the days to come. In the summer of 1945, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was sent to Hiroshima on a 3-month business trip. He and 2 colleagues had spent the summer working long hours, designing a new 5,000-ton oil tanker. By the time August arrived, the work was nearly complete. August 6, 1945, was supposed to be his last day in Hiroshima. He was going home. He was going home to Hisako, to baby Katsutoshi, to Nagasaki, to his life. He almost made it. It was a clear morning, the kind of morning that makes you feel like the world is on your side. Blue sky, warm sun, the air fresh and clean in the way that summer mornings sometimes are before the heat of the day sets in. Tsutomu was on his way to the office. He had almost everything packed. He was counting down the hours until he could board the train and start the journey home. And then he realized he had forgotten something. His ID stamp, a tiny rubber seal that every Japanese worker carried, used in place of a signature on official documents. A tiny thing, an insignificant thing, but without it, there were papers he could not complete. So he turned around, and he walked back toward the office to get it. That small decision, that tiny, frustrating, ordinary mistake is the reason Tsutomu Yamaguchi lived when so many others did not. Because the extra walk took time, and time meant he was in a slightly different place, a slightly more survivable place, when the sky broke open. He was in a potato field not far from the office when he heard it, a a sound unlike anything he had heard before. He looked up. He saw a B-29 bomber flying high above the city. He saw something fall from the plane, 2 small parachutes, a package of some kind, dropping slowly through the clear blue sky. He stood and stared, and then the world turned white. Not bright, white, completely, totally, blindingly white, as if the sun itself had fallen to earth and was burning 3 kilometers from where he stood. Tsutomu remembered his air raid training. In the fraction of a second before his body stopped responding to his mind, he threw himself to the ground. He pressed his hands over his eyes. He jammed his thumbs into his ears. He locked his fingers across the back of his skull. Then the shockwave hit. It struck him at nearly 1,000 miles per hour. It lifted him off the ground, not gently, not briefly. It threw him through the air like he weighed nothing, like he was a piece of paper in a storm. He landed in an irrigation ditch, half conscious. His eardrums ruptured, his eyes burned, temporarily blind. The left side of his body, from his head to his waist, was covered in severe burns. The air smelled of fire and something else, something chemical, something wrong. He lay there in the ditch, and the world above him burned. Hiroshima had just ceased to exist, not metaphorically, not dramatically, simply factually ceased to exist. The bomb known as Little Boy had detonated with the force of 16,000 tons of dynamite. In a single second, 80,000 people died instantly. Many of them simply ceased to be. No body to recover, no trace, gone. The city's buildings, its hospitals, its schools, its markets, its homes, all of it flattened in a radius stretching miles from the center. Fires broke out everywhere at once. The firestorm created its own weather. Black rain began to fall, dark, contaminated water dropping from the ash-filled sky, and people who survived the blast held their mouths open to catch it, not knowing what it contained. Tsutomu pulled himself out of the ditch. He could barely see, he could barely hear. The pain from the burns was extraordinary, but shock is a strange mercy. In the first hours, the body does what it has to do to keep you moving. He found his 2 colleagues. They had survived, badly shaken, badly scared, but alive. Together, the 3 men began to move through what was left of the city. What they saw, Tsutomu would spend the rest of his life trying to find words for. People who were still on fire, people walking with their skin hanging from their arms like sleeves, people sitting in the rubble who would not be there by morning. Silence in some places, and in other places, sounds that a human mind is not designed to process. They reached an air raid shelter. They spent the night there, all of them, lying in the dark, listening to the city burn. In the morning, Tsutomu made a decision. He was going home. He heard there might still be trains running. It seemed impossible in a city that barely existed anymore, but he had to try. To get to the station, he had to cross a river. The bridges were gone, destroyed or collapsed in the blast. He found a way across. I want you to understand what I am telling you now. The river was full of bodies. People who had run to the water to escape the fires. People who had not made it. Tsutomu crossed that river, using whatever he could find. And on the other side, incredibly, impossibly, a train was waiting. He got on. A train car full of burned and bewildered passengers, none of them speaking, all of them staring. The train moved, southwest, toward Nagasaki, toward home. Tsutomu arrived in Nagasaki on the morning of August 8th. He limped to the hospital. His burns were severe enough that the doctor treating him, a former school classmate, didn't recognize him at first. His own doctor, A man who had known him for years could not see his friend beneath what the bomb had done to him. His family saw him next. Hisako, his wife. She looked at the bandaged, burned man in the doorway of their home, and she did not recognize him, not at first. And then she did, and she held him. He held her back. He held baby Katsutoshi. He was home. For one day, just one day, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was home, safe with the people he loved, having survived something that had killed tens of thousands of others. He rested, or tried to. Radiation sickness was already working through his body. Headaches, nausea, the deep exhaustion that comes from the inside of a person rather than the surface. But he was alive. He was home. He had made it. He had no way of knowing that the world was not finished with him yet. On the morning of August 9th, 3 days after Hiroshima, Tsutomu Yamaguchi went to work, still bandaged, still burned, still in pain. But he had papers to file, a report to submit. The design for the tanker was complete, and there were formalities. He was a man who did his job, even now, even after everything. He sat down with his supervisor, and he began to describe what had happened in Hiroshima. He told his boss about the bomb, about the white light, about the city that disappeared, about the 80,000 dead. His boss looked at him, and his boss did not believe him. One bomb, he said? One bomb could not do all of that. That was impossible. That was madness. That was almost treason, to suggest that one weapon could destroy an entire city. Tsutomu kept talking. He was in the middle of explaining, still seated, still bandaged, still barely recovered, when the room turned white. The same white. The exact same white. The white he had seen 3 days ago in Hiroshima. 3 kilometers away, a second atomic bomb, codenamed Fat Man, had just detonated over Nagasaki. The windows of the office exploded inward. The shockwave tore through the building. Tsutomu was thrown to the floor. He later said, and I want you to sit with these words, he later said, "Suddenly the same white light filled the room. I thought the mushroom cloud had followed me from Hiroshima." He lay on the floor, his new bandages already shredded, his burns reopened. The second bomb, the second time, in 3 days, in 2 cities. Tsutomu Yamaguchi had just survived both atomic bombs ever used in the history of warfare. He was the only person officially recognized as having done so. He found his way out of the building. Around him, Nagasaki was burning. Between 35,000 and 40,000 people had died in the blast. Tens of thousands more would die in the weeks and months that followed from burns and radiation. Tsutomu ran home, or moved toward home as fast as his body allowed, which was not fast. He was a man held together by bandages and will. He found Hisako. He found Katsutoshi. They were alive. Hisako had been caught in the black rain, the dark, contaminated water that fell from the mushroom cloud. She had been poisoned by it in ways that would take years to understand, but she was alive. They were all alive. Tsutomu gathered them, and they waited for whatever came next. On August 15th, 6 days after Nagasaki, Japan surrendered. The war was over, and Tsutomu Yamaguchi stood in the ruins of his city and tried to understand what it meant to have survived what he had survived. The radiation sickness came fully in the weeks after. Headaches that felt like the skull was closing in, vomiting, hair falling out, the deep bone ache of a body fighting damage at its most fundamental level, at the level of the cells themselves, of the DNA strands being torn and slowly, painstakingly repairing themselves. For months, he was barely a man.
He was a patient, a survivor, a body trying to decide whether it wanted to continue. And then, slowly, it decided yes. Tsutomu recovered, not completely, not without cost. He lost the hearing in his left ear. He went temporarily bald. He wore bandages for years. His daughter would later say that until she was 12 years old, she could not remember a time when her father was not wrapped in bandages. But he lived. He went back to work. He served as a translator for the American forces occupying Japan. He became a teacher. He returned eventually to engineering. He and Hisako had 2 more children, daughters, both of them, born in the 1950s, born into a country trying to rebuild itself from the ash. Life continued. For decades, Tsutomu Yamaguchi said almost nothing about what had happened to him. He had survived it. He had put it behind him. He had a family. He had work. He had a life. He was not a symbol. He was not a story. He was a man. And for a long time, that was enough. But the memories did not leave. They never do, not memories like those. Tsutomu dealt with them the way many people deal with the things they cannot speak of. He wrote poetry. He wrote about the white light, about the river of bodies, about the black rain, about his daughter not recognizing him, about the feeling of 2 separate days when the world turned white and he woke up still breathing and did not know why. His poetry was quiet. It was careful. It was the writing of a man who had seen things that language was not built to describe, and who wrote anyway, because what else do you do with something too large to carry alone? In 1981, Tsutomu Yamaguchi heard Pope John Paul II give a speech in Hiroshima. The Pope said, "War is the work of man." Something shifted in Tsutomu. He was 65 years old. He had kept his silence for 36 years, and he decided, quietly, privately, in the way that all great decisions are made, that he was done keeping it. He began to speak. Slowly at first, to small groups, to students, to local organizations. Then louder. He wrote a memoir. He appeared in documentaries. He spoke to journalists from around the world who came to Nagasaki to sit across from the man who had survived what no one else had survived. And in 2006, at the age of 90 years old, Tsutomu Yamaguchi traveled to New York City. He stood before the United Nations and he spoke. He spoke about the white light, about what an atomic bomb does to a human body, about what it does to a human city, about what it does to the children and the grandchildren of those who survived, the long, invisible suffering that does not make the history books, but lives in families for generations. He was 90 years old. He had survived 2 atomic bombs. He had crossed a river of bodies. He had been thrown through the air by 2 separate shockwaves in 2 separate cities, 3 days apart. And he stood in front of the world and asked, quietly, with the patience of a man who had waited his whole life to say this, asked that it never happen again. He said, having experienced atomic bombings twice and survived, it is my destiny to talk about it. His destiny, not his burden, not his curse.
But there are things about this story that do not appear in the headlines. Things that Tsutomu carried that were not his burns, not his deafness, not his nightmares. His children. The children born after the bombs. The daughters born in the 1950s, into a father who had absorbed more radiation than any human being in history, officially at least, and who had somehow, miraculously, not been destroyed by it. His son, Katsutoshi, the baby he had held when he came home from Hiroshima, grew up and struggled and died in 2005. His wife, Hisako, who had stood in the black rain on the day of the second bomb, who had been quietly poisoned by something invisible, lived for decades with the consequences: liver cancer, kidney failure. She died in 2008 at the age of 88. Tsutomu outlived his wife, outlived his son, outlived almost everyone who had been close to him on those 2 days in August. He was the last one standing, as he often was. There is a kind of loneliness in surviving something that killed everyone around you, a kind of guilt that has no logical basis. You did nothing wrong, you simply lived, but that lives in a person anyway. Tsutomu knew that loneliness. He had known it since 1945, but he also knew something else, something he had decided quietly somewhere between the first bomb and the second, that survival is not luck, or not only luck. Survival is also a choice, made again and again, made in the ditch, made on the train, made in the ruins, made every morning when you wake up and decide that today you will still be here. In March of 2009, the Japanese government officially recognized Tsutomu Yamaguchi as a Niju Hibakusha, a double survivor, the only one, the only person in history to be officially acknowledged as having been at ground zero for both atomic bombs. He was 92 years old when they gave him that recognition. He had been waiting 64 years. He said, "My double radiation exposure is now an official government record. It can tell the younger generation the horrifying history of the atomic bombings, even after I die. Even after I die." He was thinking about what he would leave behind, not his medals, not his title, his story. He wanted his story to outlive him. Tsutomu Yamaguchi died on the 4th of January 2010. He was 93 years old. He died of stomach cancer, a disease that his doctors believed was connected, in the end, to what his body had absorbed all those decades ago. The bomb came for him one final time. It took 65 years, but it came. When the mayor of Nagasaki announced his death, he said, "I am very sorry that we have lost one of the very valuable witnesses of the atomic bomb experience." A witness. That is what Tsutomu Yamaguchi became, in the end. Not a symbol, not a statistic, a witness. A man who was there, who saw it, who survived it, who carried it, who stood up at 90 years old before the United Nations and said, "I was there. This is what it was. Please, never again." There are stories that entertain. There are stories that excite. And then there are stories like this one, stories that make you sit very still and feel the strange, overwhelming weight of being a human being, of being something that can be broken and still continue, of being something that can absorb the worst the world has ever invented and still go home, hold a child, write a poem, stand before the world and ask for something better. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was not a superhero. He was not extraordinary in the way that word usually means. He was ordinary, completely, deeply, beautifully ordinary. And that is exactly why his story will never leave you. Because if he could survive that, what can you survive? What can any of us survive? Thank you for spending this hour with me. This has been a good time to sleep. I hope this story stays with you as the way it has stayed with me, as a reminder that the human spirit is not a poetic idea. It is a fact, proven twice, 3 days apart, in 2 cities, by one ordinary man. New stories every week. Subscribe so you never miss one. And until next time, Rest well.